Welcome everyone to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 21 of the 2023 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft. And episode 21 is the fourth installment of the pre-combine edition. That's right. We've gone over the defensive ends and tackles along with the linebackers. Then we got to the corners and safeties. Now it's time to transition over to the offensive side of the football. Saturday, we're going to see quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends. And then on Sunday, the running backs and offensive linemen will finish things out. We'll make sure to go ahead and cover that in episode number 22. Now, before we jump into things, I'll tell you what, when you watch the Combine on Friday, there were some real standout performers. DJ Turner was absolutely one, just the blazing 4.27 40. That absolutely jumped out. Actually, they dropped to a 4.26 official time. But I thought Deonte Banks was another guy that absolutely helped himself. 4.35 40, and then also jumping through the building with a 42-inch vertical leap, which is absolutely ridiculous. You got Christian Gonzalez, who looked every bit the part as that number one corner, 41.5-inch vertical leap. Also a blazing 4.38 40. I think coming out of this, you saw that explosiveness from Christian Gonzalez. Emmanuel Forbes, another guy that really came out, ran a great time, 4.35. Joey Porter Jr., look, you talk about the length and everything at 6'2", runs that 4.46 40. So I think that he's still right there in that conversation as one of the top corners. Safeties, Brandon Hill, Daniel Scott, Jartavius Martin, Sidney Brown, Jordan Howden, all breaking that 4.5 barrier. So, obviously there's going to be a lot to talk about breaking all these players down. I mentioned Trey Dean, one of the taller, thicker safeties, runs that 4.75 40. Again, you're going to worry about the explosiveness and the stiffness there to his game. But we're going to break down all of the results in the post-combine recap and really talk about all 4 days of the on-field assignments. So really what we want to do, because we've got a lot of positions and a lot of players to get through in today's podcast, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right into things. And obviously we know with the quarterback position, we've got 3 of the top 4 prospects that will actually be throwing. We know Bryce Young won't be throwing. The question is really going to be, is he going to be participating in any of the drills, in any of the workouts? I know he's going to be throwing on his work day, on his pro day. So really the question is where's Bryce Young ultimately going to be at the Combine? Are we going to see him at all? Measuring in 6 foot, he says he's right around 200 pounds or so. We'll get the final measurements in there. But look, Bryce Young to me is the most polished quarterback. He's the most NFL ready. And, is he going to be the first overall pick? Is Houston going to try to trade up to make sure that Indy doesn't sneak up there and get their guy? I think Indy, you've got Jim Irsay, the owner, he's got to be looking to get that next quarterback. They've really been struggling since Andrew Luck retired, and so I could absolutely see them trying to move up and get Bryce Young. So it's going to be interesting. Bryce Young, look, again, he's a smallish quarterback, and you put a guy like that, with that smaller stature and smaller size under center, and you worry about his shelf life there in the NFL. But he's the most polished. He's got the best film of any of the quarterbacks. And I think Bryce Young he's ready to be number 1 overall in terms of the quarterback position. And shoot, he could be the number 1 overall pick. We're pretty convinced that the Bears are likely to go ahead and move on and trade down. And so it's just a matter of exactly where the Bears decide to trade and move down on the board. C.J. Stroud, he's going to be throwing, look, 6'3", 218 pounds, the redshirt sophomore, a 2-time Heisman finalist. This was a guy, when you watch the film, he didn't necessarily drive the football a ton. Decision-making wasn't always there, in terms of the speed. He was always an accurate quarterback, but just how quickly was he processing things. Then you put on the Georgia film, and this is a guy who looked like a much different quarterback under center. The athleticism, his ability to show that threat to run, I thought that was really the best film CJ Stroud. Really on point, making those throws, and very confident in the pocket, driving on throws that we didn't see him do during the season. So very much a different quarterback in the bowl game there. And so I think that really bodes well for CJ Stroud. I think he and Bryce Young are going to be the top two quarterbacks in the draft to hear their names selected. And I think when you look at CJ Stroud, obviously you want to see the arm strength. You want to see the mobility as well, something that I think CJ Stroud's able to bring to the table. Then you have a guy like Anthony Richardson, and I know NFL Network has already said Anthony Richardson has had some of the best interviews. He's 6'4", 232 pounds, and I hope he runs the 40. Would love to see what he's going to run that in. I doubt that he does, but you're going to be able to see some of that accuracy. And I think really more than anything else, you're looking at the footwork. I think a big part of the reason why he was only completing 53% of his passes was the footwork. Footwork really slowed him up. I think one of the things where he struggled, though, was on the throws that you need to make, that you have to make. You're in rhythm. You've got an open receiver, some of these short to intermediate routes, and he was still missing guys. You want to have a quarterback who makes things look easy, not make it look hard. And, some of the easier throws just looked very difficult for Anthony Richardson. And I know footwork's going to have some of it, but there's still a long way to go, a long learning curve for Anthony Richardson. I think teams are really looking at that Josh Allen deal with Buffalo, and they're saying, all right, this is going to happen in every draft. That, okay, we're going to be able to mold this next quarterback, this next great quarterback into Josh Allen. Maybe Josh Allen is just an anomaly. Maybe quarterbacks who don't complete at least 60% of their passes in college really aren't able to make that transition to the next level. I think there's still a lot there with Anthony Richardson. You've got the tools, the traits, and I think that's really what's going to be on display there at the Combine. But you really worry about what he's going to be able to do out there athletically. There's no question, but I think a lot of it is, if you struggle to make those throws, then how are you really going to be able to do that at the next level on a consistent basis? That I just don't know. Will Levis is a guy. Look, he battled the offense much like Josh Allen did. Poor offensive line. He lost some of his weapons, having to really build that chemistry with some freshman receivers, and kind of struggled to do that during the season. This is a guy who plays the quarterback position like a linebacker, looking to really make some plays out there. But with that physicality, he's got the arm strength. Everything seems to be a fastball with him. He lacks some of that touch. Decision-making can be questionable at times as well. But I think this is another, just like with Anthony Richardson, I think you're going to see Will Levis showcase a lot of athleticism, a lot of arm, make all kinds of crazy throws, be able to throw on the run with accuracy. That's really, you want to see, you're going to see the big arms out of the two of them, but I don't know that either of them are going to be close to being as accurate as CJ Stroud when it's all said and done. QB1, and obviously there are other quarterbacks that will be here. QB1 is going to be Tyson Bagent out of Shepherd, a guy who set records there. Small school kid, the only guy from a smaller school that did get an invite to the Combine. He's a guy. Look, we got to see him at the Senior Bowl. What's he going to look like at the Combine, especially when he's throwing with all of the guys, not just some of the senior quarterbacks? There's a lot of talent that's going to be out there on the field. You wonder if the stage is going to be a little bit too big for him. That's really going to go a long way towards whether or not we're talking about him as a draftable commodity. Stetson Bennett out of Georgia, he's already had to answer to the arrest. This is a guy, again, I think he can be a late draft pick. You see he's been doubted, he's been counted out. He was the guy that never should have been the starter. They brought in JT Daniels to be the starter, and he was able to earn his way onto that field. Very intelligent player out on the football field, at least. The arrest, obviously, again, he had to apologize for that. But this is a guy that was a proven winner there at Georgia and really, captained that offense. Game manager, I think you can say that, but he's got a stronger arm than you would expect. Absolute, he has really nice mobility. I think he can end up being a backup at the next level. Malik Cunningham out of Louisville, like another guy that I'd love to see run the 40. This is a guy who can be a dynamic runner in the open field. I think he's another quarterback who has a long way to go in terms of his development as a passer. But from an athletic profile standpoint, he's one of the better athletes in this draft class at the quarterback position. A lot of throws that he left out there on the field there for Louisville, but definitely a guy that could stick onto a roster and be one of those developmental prospects. Max Duggan, TCU. We know what he's been able to do, what he's been able to accomplish. Wasn't even the starter there at TCU. Chandler Morris had the starting job. Gets in there due to injury, and Max Duggan had been the starter there for the Horned Frogs. Takes it over and ultimately was the Heisman runner-up. Really just a phenomenal year there with TCU, and took him to the national title game. We all know that story. But a guy that, accuracy didn't seem to be too much of a problem. He has an average arm, really good mobility. I think, really what you're looking at there is a guy whose ceiling is probably going to be, a decent backup at the next level. Jake Haener of Fresno State. To me, this guy is the gamer. This is the guy that teams are going to be looking for, a guy that could fly under the radar and end up being a starter at the next level. I mean, Taylor Heineke for Washington was a guy that was a definite backup spot starter, and a guy that was able to win a lot of football games there for the Commanders. I think Jake Haener could absolutely be that guy. He's a tough dude. If you watch that UCLA game, took a ton of punishment. And, I never thought that the guy was going to get back up, but he did, and ended up leading the Bulldogs to the victory there. Jake Haener, to me, is a guy that if you're looking for a quarterback to kind of mold into that backup role, I think Jake Haener can be that guy, a guy that I think could end up starting some games at the next level. Jaron Hall out of BYU, tremendous athlete. I think he struggled quite a bit, in the All-Star games. A guy who ended up finishing his career there at BYU with his foot in the boot. But this is a guy, he's got tremendous bloodlines. Son of former BYU running back Kalen Hall, BYU gymnast Holly Hamilton. A guy that has some accuracy and is really good in terms of that decision making. Doesn't always force it. Make sure to take what the defense gives him. Can be a very accurate passer, especially on the run. Watched him against Oregon. I mean, he really started off the game hot, 12 of 13 for 152 yards and a touchdown. Really a nice quick release, but again, missed some receivers out there, left some throws that he needed to make. Right now, he's a day 3 guy for me, probably in that 5th round range. Then you look at Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee. Obviously, this was a guy that was going to be in the Heisman conversation had it not been for the knee injury that took him out. But obviously a mature player. He's going to be a 25-year-old rookie, and essentially we have to kind of write off his rookie season. But what you're going to get with Hendon Hooker is a guy that he came in and understood what Josh Heupel was trying to do at Tennessee. They run a lot of those really wide splits, and I thought he did a really good job surveying the field, taking what the defense was giving him, finding his receivers, and look, one of the best deep balls, if not the best deep ball in this class. And that's really what helped Jalen Hyatt win that Biletnikoff Award, was his ability to hit Jalen Hyatt down the field in stride, play after play. Also a very mobile quarterback, can beat you with his legs a little bit, can manipulate the pocket, extend the play. And look, after the big 4, I think it's Hendon Hooker as my number 5 quarterback, followed by Jake Haener at number 6. And then after that, maybe Aiden O'Connell, who's obviously going to be there as well. Aiden O'Connell, an intelligent quarterback there at Purdue. I think some athletic limitations, but definitely a guy that I thought was a consistent performer there for the Boilermakers, and will be maybe a late day 2, but I think more than likely he's going to be there, in that 4th, 5th round range on day 3. Tanner McKee out of Stanford. Look, this is the guy who's your prototypical drop back passer in the pocket. I worry about Tanner McKee at the next level. I don't think he's very mobile. He's got a really a rocket arm and a very quick release, but he reminds me of Sean Mannion to a degree. When Sean Mannion was coming out of Oregon State, really a solid quarterback, but the mobility, he was more of a statue in the pocket. I don't think Tanner McKee is quite on that level, but he's not the most mobile. He's one of the least mobile of these quarterbacks, and so I think it's going to be difficult for him to get drafted higher than the 6th or 7th round. DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. You want to talk about a gamer there at UCLA. This is a guy who can create both with his legs and with his arm. Really nice arm strength. Can fit into some of those tight windows. You saw that with Jake Bobo time and time again, making a lot of throws up the, whether it was down the middle of the field, hitting receivers up the seam, or getting the ball to the outside the numbers, to the wide side of the field. Dorian Thompson-Robinson was able to make some of those throws. I thought he did a little bit too much. I thought there was some pressure on him to be the guy, and I think he struggled with that at times because he makes some throws that he really didn't need to make. Just take what the defense gives him, and didn't always see the entire field and would make some bad throws, and I think that's what cost UCLA a couple of those games. Just way too many interceptions. Clayton Tune out of Houston. I think Clayton Tune's an underrated prospect. I think a lot of people aren't really talking about him. He's a guy that is a top 10 quarterback in my eyes in this draft class. 44 starts there at Houston, 101 career touchdowns, and a guy that really developed a ton of chemistry with Tank Dell, Keyshawn Carter. You saw the touch, his ability to drop the ball right in over their shoulder. Decent arm strength. Not going to wow you, but I think it's serviceable, and a guy that, again, the mobility, that's really where we're going at the quarterback position, is you've got to be mobile within the pocket and be able to manipulate it. Not necessarily have to take off and run like an Anthony Richardson or a Malik Cunningham, but be able to manipulate the pocket, be able to extend those plays, keep those eyes down the field, and be able to make a play on the run. So those are the quarterbacks that are going to be entering the combine tomorrow. If I were to break it down, I think with Tyson Bagent, I want to see this kid, really rise to the occasion there at the combine. Stetson Bennett, look, you're going to be undersized. We know that. You're under 6 feet tall. You're going to have to show that you belong at the next level. Showcase that arm strength. Showcase his ability to move, and show up well in the interviews. He's already owned up to what happened with the off-field incident. And so just continue to showcase, that leadership ability that we know that he has coming from Georgia. Malik Cunningham, we know the type of athlete that you are. Want to see if you've improved as a passer with the mechanics, the footwork, and the ability to be accurate on a continuous basis. Max Duggan, limited arm strength, so really looking at that arm. Can he drive the football down the field? Jake Haener, I think the size is going to be a concern for some teams. So really, being able to showcase his ability to drive the football, be able to make a lot of those throws down the football field, throw with a ton of zip, and being able to showcase that mobility as well. Jaron Hall, we know he's a great athlete. Want to take a look at, again, mechanics. I think that's going to be a theme here. Hendon Hooker won't be working out because of the injury, but he's a guy that I think will excel in the interviews. Will Levis, look, the accuracy. We know we're going to have the big arm. Accuracy can be there, but I think with Will Levis, a lot of it is going to be on the board work and really being able to showcase his ability to read defenses, be able to understand, being able to see the entire field. You can't always get that when you're actually there at the combine, because a lot of it is really just throwing to receivers that are covered by air and you don't have anybody rushing you. But being able to have some of those conversations, I think that's going to go a long way for Will Levis. Tanner McKee, show your athleticism. That's really going to be the main thing for him. Aiden O'Connell, I think to a lesser degree, needs to show off a little bit more of the athleticism as well. Showcase that arm strength. Anthony Richardson, it's going to be all about accuracy and footwork. Really want to be able to make sure that this is a guy that you've got the tools. A team has to look at him and say, we can fix those mechanics. We can fix the feet and be able to turn him into an NFL starter, a proven NFL starter. CJ Stroud, we want to see that guy, that confident leader that we saw in that Georgia game. Is that the CJ Stroud we can expect at the next level? If so, then CJ Stroud's going to be a top 5 pick for sure. DTR, again, this is going to be another guy who I think, you get him on the board, being able to read defenses, understand schemes, and see the entire field. We know what he's like as an athlete. Want to be able to see what he can do out there on the field, just how accurate he can be throwing to receivers that he hasn't thrown to before. Clayton Tune, arm strength. I'm curious to see him driving on the football. I think he plays with a lot of touch. We know that he's a mobile quarterback. What can he do there? And then really with Bryce Young, I'm just curious to see what he weighs in as. Is he going to be over 200 pounds? And then is he going to do any working out at all? Because we know he's not throwing. Is he going to do any of the testing? That's really the biggest question that I have. Or are we just going to see everything at Bama's Pro Day? Either way, Bryce Young to me is going to be the #1 quarterback off the board when it's when it's all said and done. So tight ends, we know that the tight ends will be out there. We've got a good group of guys that we have to keep an eye out for. And when you talk tight ends, the first tight end on the board, TE1, if you will, is going to be Davis Allen out of Clemson. 6'6", 250 pounds, and a guy that I thought was known for his blocking, but a guy that really showed off his ability to be a red zone nightmare for teams because of his ability to elevate and cause some of those mismatches with a lot of the 50-50 balls, but also his ability to contort his body and make that adjustment to a poorly thrown football. He's a guy that was also a weapon up the seam. Curious to see some of the route running from Davis Allen, but a guy that I think has a chance to be an early round draft pick when especially if he runs a really nice time here in the 40. Payne Durham out of Purdue. Look, 6'5", 255 pounds. A guy who played 4 years of high school lacrosse, just 1 year of high school football. This dude is a weapon down the field. Ability to uncover down the seam time and time again. Lined up at H-back, would run some angle routes. He's really a versatile tight end, a guy that you can line up in a multitude of areas. Very tough guy. Took some big hits and still held on to the football. I think Payne Durham's another underrated tight end. Noah Gindorf there out of North Dakota State. He's a guy for me that, look, you're coming from a small school, and I think he's overshadowed by Tucker Kraft. So really, showcase some of that athleticism and his ability to block. I think, his blocking ability, if you're a tight end there for North Dakota State, you have to be able to block. So I think really being able to showcase some of that, his ability to roll those hips and really drive into those blocks and then keep those feet moving. Where's that hand placement going to be? That I think will bode well for Noah if he's looking to get drafted there on day 3. Dalton Kincaid, we know the type of athlete that this guy is. 6'4", 242 pounds, the junior. Look, you just put on the USC game and he was uncoverable. He was a tough, physical runner. He was very sure-handed. You saw the route running ability, his ability to separate. He was a deep threat, the deep weapon. And the Trojans, that zone coverage, he absolutely ate them up. I thought that route running, again, is one of those keys for him. He's not the best blocker by any means, but I think he's an improving blocker in that Florida game. You saw his ability to keep his hands inside the frame, good knee bend and leg drive. Just want to be able to obviously showcase that athleticism because you're looking at Kincaid, Musgrave to go along with Michael Mayer and Darnell Washington. He's going to have to showcase that athleticism and be really the best athlete on the field. If he wants to be that #1 tight end. I just don't know that that's going to happen, but that doesn't mean he won't be a first-round pick at that tight end position. Tucker Kraft, the aforementioned Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota State, 6'5", 255. This is a guy who lined up all over the field. He lined up wide, versus off coverage, and very, very good concentration, has excellent hands, but he's also physical at the point of attack as a blocker in the running game. In the FCS championship against North Dakota State, gets underneath the pad level of the 6'5", 282-pound defensive end, Spencer Waggy, and really just drove him down the field. A guy that just continually seemed to make blocks for his running back, Isaiah Davis, in the running game, a weapon as a pass catcher as well. So I think Tucker Kraft is a guy that could hear his name called on day 2. If not, then by round 4, he should be off the board. Zach Kuntz out of Old Dominion. Look, 6'8", 240 pounds. I thought he was a pretty smooth route runner. Showed up at ODU after 3 years there at Penn State. Really his best year was in 2021, 73 catches for 692 yards and 5 touchdowns. Only played in 5 games in 2022 for ODU. But look, when he was healthy, he was one of the better pass-catching tight ends in this draft. And there are rumors that this guy could run 4.5 at 6'8". If that's possible, then that's absolutely staggering. For a guy that size to be able to do that. This guy was a state champion as a hurdler and a high jumper in high school. So, the track athlete, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Zach Kuntz could be one of those names that could start rising up some draft boards with a big performance there at the Combine. Sam Laporta, 6'4", 249 pounds. This is a guy who tore his meniscus in November. But a guy, look, excellent route runner, a sure-handed receiver, and when you watched him, he lined up all over the place, really savvy as a route runner, and then the yards after catch, I think those were the things that were tremendous. A guy that really I thought was fun to watch because he liked to get physical with you, and as a runner, it made it very difficult for defenders to bring him down. I thought he was, absolutely versatile because he's one of the better blockers in this year's draft class as well, and a guy that I think is either a second or third round pick. So if you're not wanting to spend a draft pick on a tight end in round number 1, you can wait and get it Sam Laporta, a guy that I think could end up being a starter at the next level very early on. I don't know the meniscus tear, if he's going to work out, but if he does, keep an eye on him, especially in the drills. You're going to see some really nice route running out of him. Very smooth athlete, that's for sure. Then you have Cameron Latou out of Alabama, the converted defensive end, 6'5", 250 pounds, solid blocker. That's one of the things that I think you saw time and time again was his ability to spring those running backs for extra yards, and was a timely receiver. I'm not as high on him as a lot of guys. I'm really curious to see the type of athlete that he truly is. Look, he was a defensive end, tight end. I think he's known for his physicality. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be a burner by any means. So I'm going to be curious to see what that 40 time looks like and just how smooth he is coming in and out of his breaks. We know that there are other guys in this draft class who are going to be those tremendous athletes. One of those guys is going to be Will Mallory out of Miami. 6'4", 248 pounds. This is a guy who, just screams athleticism. You watch him play, his ability to attack the seam on a regular basis, his ability to, just show the body control as a receiver as well. Those are some of the things that I think we're obviously going to be looking at. Really good hands. At that tight end position. I thought there were times where he struggled to make a lot of noise there for Miami, but obviously quarterback play was questionable at times. But this is a guy, look, really does a great job attacking the football in the air. I think Will Mallory is a great athlete. I just wonder about his ability as a tight end at the next level. Michael Mayer, 6'4", 251, probably the most complete tight end in this year's draft class. This is a guy who I think everybody is expecting to come out and just excel wherever he's at. He's definitely a physical pass blocker, very shows up really well with his technique there at the point of attack, the hands, the knee bend, the drive, keeps those feet moving. And then as an athlete, in the passing game, this is a guy who has tremendous route running ability, his ability to beat guys one-on-one. He's a nightmare matchup for corners and safeties because of his size and that athletic profile. He's not the most explosive tight end by any means, but he's very fluid and a tremendous route runner. And then you watch the hands, his ability to extend for the football. You know, he uses that big body against those smaller defenders, but then also has the speed to challenge those linebackers as well, going over the top. And look, he's a guy that is going to look to sustain his blocks. He's looking to get physical. So you want to see, obviously, the pass catching. You also want to see that blocking ability. You know, I think Michael Mayer is going to be one of the top blockers in the draft. I mentioned Noah Jindorf. He's another guy that's going to be a lot of fun to watch in the blocking. You know, and then obviously Darnell Washington is the guy that we'll be talking about here in just a minute. After that, Luke Musgrave. Tremendous athlete. 6'6", 252 pounds, the nephew of former NFL quarterback Bill Musgrave, and just the athleticism. This is a guy, you know, I think he struggles at times as a blocker, but man, this is a guy who I'm going to be curious to see what that 40 time is, because he can absolutely fly. He's a big dude, but a guy that just absolutely shows up with tremendous body control, his ability to adjust to the football, and then just that blazing speed. How fast is that 40 time going to be? And I'm curious to see what that vertical leap and the broad jump are going to be. I think there's going to be a lot of lower body explosiveness to this guy, but a weapon for the seam for sure. Musgrave, though, and Mayer, they're not the best pass catchers in this year's draft. Really, when you're looking at guys who just don't drop the football, Dalton Kincaid and Davis Allen, I think, have the best percentage in terms of balls thrown their way that they were able to haul in. Very few balls that were dropped by either of those two guys, but still, Musgrave and Mayer are still going to be two of the top 4 tight ends taken in this year's draft. Kyle Patterson, he's 6'6", 250 pounds, out of Air Force. Obviously, we know that he's a tremendous run blocker. You know, that's one of that's really Air Force, the Falcons, their calling card. Blocks downhill, you know, in a hurry, and does a great job, you know, just really blocking and washing down the line as well. And so I think that's going to kind of be a staple of his. But he's also a weapon in the passing game. He's got a tremendous wingspan, extends for the football, really a matchup nightmare on the outside, using that length to his advantage. I think that blocking ability is something to really take notice of there at the combine, though. Luke Schoonmaker, the junior out of Michigan, 6'6", 250. He's a big kid. They played him at fullback and H-back at times, also at the tight end spot. And a guy that, you know, if you remember that TCU game, he actually lined up at fullback for the first play, picks up the linebacker Jamoy Hodge down the field. Donovan Edwards cuts right off that block with a burst down the field for 53 yards. And then later on runs a corner route. After that, linebacker clears, able to make the catch down the field, turn, get up the field for a 32-yard gain. This is a guy that, you know, he can block a little bit, he can make catches a little bit. Not the tremendous athlete that some of these other guys are, but I think he's a solid tight end, a guy that I could see being a backup tight end at the next level. Brenton Strange, 6'3", 246. A guy that plays with excellent leverage as a blocker. I think he's also going to showcase some of that athleticism as a pass catcher. Definitely a guy that has excellent hands and really was a weapon coming over the middle. You've got Leonard Taylor at Cincinnati. He and Josh Wiley, they were kind of that dynamic duo. You know, they could line up in line, they could line up in the slot, they could line up at H-back. Leonard Taylor, to me, I think he's known for his blocking ability, but he's also a guy that I think is underrated as a pass catcher, and I'm hoping that he's able to showcase that. Travis Vokalek out of Nebraska, look, 6'7", 260. I think he's known as a blocker, you know, quite a bit, but man, you know, especially if you watch that Northwestern game, he was a weapon up the seam. He was able to extend for the football outside his frame, just continued to be an easy target for Casey Thompson, who was the quarterback at the time there for Nebraska. Transferred from Rutgers, ultimately battled an ankle injury during the season. And when you look at Vokalek, he's an athletic tight end when you can keep him on the field. I think he struggled with injuries at times, and you know, really the injury bug even bit him in there in 2022. But a guy that, you know, when healthy, He can be a weapon for you, both as a blocker and as a pass catcher. You just wonder if you can keep him on the field. That's going to be really the biggest question mark, are those medicals. Then you have Darnell Washington, as I mentioned, 6'7", 270, 75 pounds. He's like another offensive lineman out there. This is a guy who I think is going to destroy the bags in the blocking drills. A guy who, again, 6th offensive lineman, a guy that uses that length to his advantage, shoots those hands inside really quick, and then, man, he's going to drive you down the field and look to just punish you. Excellent leverage, just washes down the line. Running backs being able to cut off of him easily. Excellent burst vertically up the seam, a guy that's going to get by you there. And then he's very physical after the catch as well. I think that Darnell Washington is going to excel in the blocking drills. And then obviously as that pass catcher, for a guy his size, he's just that rare athletic profile. You want to see what he's going to run in the 40 and just the type of athlete that he is. I think he's a guy that if he has a tremendous combine, he's one of those guys that is being talked about as a potential first rounder. I have him coming off the board in round number 1 in my most recent mock. This is obviously before the combine and before free agency, but he's one of those guys that can be a first, second round. So after a big performance at the combine, I think that would bode well for his draft stock and solidify his status as a first-round tight end, in my opinion. Blake Whitehart out of Wake Forest. I think when you look at Blake Whitehart, the biggest thing that you see is some of that blocking ability. I think that's really one of his calling cards, if you will. 6'4", 240 pounds. But look, he also caught 24 passes for 295 yards and 3 touchdowns. Really curious to see some of that pass catching ability there from him. You worry about him getting lost in the shuffle, so you want to be able to showcase some athleticism there, to go along with the blocking. Josh Wiley out of Cincinnati, 6'6", 245, a guy that, look, he can play H-back if you want him to. He can also play tight end and kind of line up all over the field. Another guy that, Bruce Feldman, his freak list, this is a guy that popped up on it, and a guy that they're expecting to test very well in the jumps, the shuttles, and that 40. So he's one of those guys that could be, again, teams that aren't looking to spend a high draft pick on a tight end could still get some of these really athletic tight ends later on in the draft. This is one of the deeper tight end classes you'll ever find because, you just see just how many athletic tight ends we're talking about here. And then the last guy on the list is kind of your Swiss Army knife. It's Braden Willis out of Oklahoma, 6'4", 235, really an H-back for them. He only lined up at tight end, lined up as a wildcat quarterback. He's really an interesting guy, and he's a good pass catcher, excellent blocker, physical at the point of attack, and a guy that could be a weapon up the seam, could run routes a little bit, and again, with that wildcat ability, a guy that knows what to do when the football's in his hand. So I think he's a guy that's going to showcase a little bit of everything as well, solidify that status as a probably a 6th round pick, if I had to guess, maybe 5th round when it's all said and done. But a guy that's just going to be a lot of fun to watch in a lot of the different drills. He might even end up being a little on the lighter side, maybe that 239, but I think that athleticism is going to show up very well. And regardless of where you line him up, he's going to be a lot of fun. And that versatility, again, is going to boost that draft stock. So 5th, 6th, 7th round range, I could make an argument for him in the 5th round, but I could also say, he's more of an H-back, fullback. You may be talking about him 6th, 7th round when it's all said and done. But he's going to be a lot of fun at the combine either way. So those are the tight ends after we talked about the quarterbacks. Now we get to the receivers. And receiver number 1 is going to be Jordan Addison. I mean, look, when you're talking about who the best wide receiver in this draft class is, I think there are, depending on who you talk to, there are 4 or 5 guys that we could really be talking about. Jordan Addison is one of those guys. I firmly believe that Jordan Addison, that ankle injury, showed up time and time again on the field. When Jordan Addison was at his best and really at 100%, I think it was that Stanford game. And look, nobody on Stanford, Kayubu Blue Kelly included, could not cover him. He was making cuts down the field without losing any speed, and just the explosiveness, the route running ability, the savviness as a receiver. And when I look at Jordan Addison, this is a guy that I think he's got longer arms, but he's 6 foot, 175 pounds. He's definitely not Devontae Adams by any means, because I don't think that he necessarily has the route running chops. But he's definitely an explosive playmaker and a guy that could end up being that #1 receiver when it's all said and done because of his explosiveness, that route running ability, and his ability to make plays after the catch, making those cuts down the field without slowing down. I think those are things that, to me, really jumped off the film, and just want to see him continue to showcase that. Ronnie Bell will be wide receiver number 2. 5'11", 188 pounds there at Michigan. This is a guy who showed off some really good speed, and I think that's going to be one of his calling cards, right? He's a guy that was able to get vertical time and time again. A guy that also showed some toughness with some blocks down the field to spring his fellow receivers for a lot of yards. Ronnie Bell, look, Michigan was all about running the football. So Ronnie Bell didn't get a lot of action at that receiver position. He still caught 62 passes for 889 yards and 4 touchdowns this past season. But look, Michigan still was a run-first offense. So you really want to see him elevate his game here at the Combine. Jake Bobo out of UCLA, 6'5", 215 pounds. This guy, look, excellent route runner, I thought. This is a guy who showed off tremendous hands, concentration through collisions, to still be able to haul in the football and maintain possession all the way to the ground. I thought that he did a really good job with his route running against Clark Phillips III, playing Utah. They were at the 10-yard line. He was in the slot. Phillips was in off coverage at about 7 yards. Stemmed at 5 yards, showing the outside, but then a hard sell. Got Phillips to take that step to the outside, cross his face, made an easy catch to the inside for the score. I think Bobo obviously has the size, the wingspan, and his ability to be a threat not only in the red zone but on the 50-50 balls. But that route running ability really was striking, because there were a lot of corners in the Pac-12 who struggled to cover Jake Bobo, the transfer from Duke. And so when I look at Jake Bobo, I'm just curious to see how fast he is. Is he quicker than he is fast? He's 6'5", so you wonder about the speed down the field. I think he's got a lot of build-up speed, but I'm really curious to see what he runs, because I thought that route running ability, really jumped off some of the tape. Kayshon Boutte, LSU, 6 foot, 190 pounds. Is he the next great LSU Tiger wide receiver? I think that's a big question mark. This is a guy who I think when he wants to play, he can be a very explosive receiver. The thing with it is his motor runs hot and cold. So that's really one of the things at the Combine that I'm going to be looking for is this guy, can he put on a show? Can he showcase the speed that we know that he has? Can he really make sure that he's hauling in every pass? Is he going to showcase that effort on every single rep? That's really what I'm going to be looking for with Kayshon Boutte. I think he can be a really solid second-round pick and could end up challenging to be a wide receiver 1 at the next level. But you just wonder about, is his head in the game? And I think there are going to be questions that teams are going to be asking of him. And so that interview process, I think, is also going to be huge for him as well. You've got Jalen Brooks, 6'2" receiver there out of South Carolina. And this past season, 33 catches, 504 yards, and a score. South Carolina, look, they really caught fire there at the end with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. And, Jalen Brooks was one of those guys. One of those guys there at that receiver spot. Wasn't the main target. And so that's really where Jalen Brooks, I think, is going to struggle to end up getting his name called on draft day, because there are a lot of talented receivers in this year's draft class. Jalen Brooks wasn't overly productive, really wasn't the best receiver on his own team. So I think if he wants to work his way into priority free agent zone and possibly get himself drafted, he's going to have a really nice pro day. So I'll definitely be watching that for sure. Then you go on to Jason Brownlee out of Southern Miss, 6'3", 202, a West Point transfer. A guy that was very productive for Southern Miss, and I thought, look, against Rice, he had this stutter off the line, gets an outside release, ball was thrown up, underthrown, but he tracked the ball well, came back to the ball, hauled it in, as a back shoulder throw for 27 yards. A guy that I thought, he ran a sluggo as well for a 26-yard touchdown, showed slant, gets that corner to come down, and then after that, he's able to go ahead and take off and run right by him. So you see some of that route running ability. You see his ability to track the football really well. Again, playing at Southern Miss, I think teams, he may not have been on teams' radar, but really that's where the area scouts come into play. I like Jason Brownlee as an athlete. He's one of those guys, to me, seem to continue to make plays. Every time I watched him play, I watched him against Louisiana, I watched him against Rice, and he was a guy that continued to be a playmaker down the field, showing that ability to track the ball well, and then the body control to adjust to that football in the air and make a play. Jason Brownlee's a guy, I still don't know if he's going to get drafted, if that's going to be enough, but he's got good size, and I think that's something that's going to bode well for him. Really curious to see what that 40 time is going to be for him, because I think some of that speed down the field definitely jumps off the film. I think he can be a pretty solid leaper as well. So a guy that I think could potentially work his way onto a practice squad. Jacob Copeland, 6 foot 202, spent 4 years at Florida, moved on to Maryland. Really was kind of that number 3 receiver in their group, behind Dante Demas and Raheem Jarrett, who are also in this year's draft class. To me, he's a guy that is going to be competing here. There are a lot of guys in this year's draft class at that receiver position that didn't take full advantage of the time when they were out there on the field. This is a guy that I thought, I wanted to see a little bit. He left me wanting more, and so that's something that hopefully, he's a guy that can step out there onto the field at the combine and start turning heads and forcing people to go back to the game film and really study him a lot more. I just don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm hoping that it does, because I'd love to go back and study Jacob Copeland a little bit more. Jalen Moreno-Cropper, Fresno State, 6 foot, 180 pounds, savvy receiver. You love the route running ability, running dig routes, flattening those routes out to make it easier on Jake Haener. This is a guy that can put his foot in the ground, hit the hole at full speed, and then make you miss in the open field. Just curious just how explosive he is, in terms of that overall speed. I think he may be quicker than he is fast, which is just fine. But obviously those 40 times jump off the film and really get a lot of people excited. But if you're a quick receiver, you know how to get open, you can separate, get in and out of your breaks quickly like Jalen Moreno-Cropper does. I think that's going to bode well for him at the next level. Darius Davis out of TCU, 5'10", 175 pounds. This guy is a dynamic return man. Just very explosive. The speed, that's going to be something that I'm going to be curious about. He's a state 200-meter champion. They're saying right around the 4.3 range. He may even run sub 4.3. I think, the track this year is very fast in Indy, so I'll be curious to see what time he puts up. But if nothing else, this is a guy who can be a dynamic return man. 83-yard punt return for touchdown there against Texas Tech. That was his 5th punt return in his career. Once he makes you miss, then watch out. Nathaniel Tank Dell, 5'10", 165 pounds. This guy, back-to-back seasons with 1,200 yards. He's a smallish guy, right? But man, he was so fun to watch. In the All-Star games, they just couldn't cover him. You saw his ability to just sink the hips and just be so sudden in and out of his breaks. Tracks the ball really well, tremendous hands. This was a guy who I thought, has a chip on his shoulder because I think he was slighted as a Biletnikoff Award finalist. He's got the 15 touchdowns on the year. Just the suddenness is something that I think is going to be on display for him, and so that'll be a lot of fun to watch. Dante Demas out of Maryland, 6'3", right around 213 pounds. A tall guy, and has a lot of meat on those bones as well. This is a dude who got bit with an injury. It was a knee injury there against Iowa in 2021. Really hyperextended that knee in the second quarter, kind of got twisted around. It was really an ugly play. What you loved was on the card he's yelling, "I'm coming back," and it's one of those things to where I didn't quite see the same explosiveness out of him. So that's one of the things that you worry about with the medicals for a guy like Dante Demas, because I think he was really on his way to probably entering the draft after the 2021 season. Through 5 games, 28 catches, 507 yards. That's 18.1 yards per reception and 3 touchdowns. In 2022, through 12 games, 22 receptions, 233 yards, and just a score. So really, is he all the way back from that knee injury? That's going to be a big question mark, and that's something that I'm going to be looking forward to there at the Combine. Demario Douglas, the diminutive one there out of Liberty, 5'8", 170 pounds. Again, I was really surprised that he decided to come out of Liberty when he did. But look, he's a dynamic slot receiver. That's one of the things that you see. You want to get the ball in his hands in a variety of ways. You see pop passes. You're going to see end arounds to him. Speed for days. So that's really the big thing that you want to see out of him is just put those afterburners on and see what he can do in the 40, and then also with some of the other drills, 3-cone drill, and just want to see that type of athlete that he is. Just under 1,000 yards this past season, but a guy to me that probably should have come back to school for another year. But you love the explosiveness. He's a slot guy. He'll be a day 3 pick. I think it'll be late, but I think he's a guy that could be that guy that can work out of the slot and showcase that speed. Josh Downs out of North Carolina. Look, 5'10", 180 pounds. This guy was a model of consistency for the Tar Heels, and a guy that just continued to produce. Some people have him as high as their #1 wideout. I don't know that I could necessarily go that far. I think measurement-wise, I'm really curious to take a look at this because he seems to have really short arms. So I'm curious to see what that wingspan is going to look like. But look, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, back-to-back seasons with at least 8 touchdowns, then nearly have back-to-back seasons with at least 100 receptions. Fell just 6 receptions short there in 2022. This guy is a savvy route runner, very explosive, and that's something that I think you're definitely going to be looking forward to in the drills. He's also going to be an explosive route runner. That's the thing that you're going to absolutely see is the stop ability. A guy that's able to create separation. He's got a nice hop step and a stutter. Those are kind of his go-to moves, but he likes to vary his release. So you're going to hopefully see some of that there at the Combine as well. This is a guy that can win coming off the line very quickly, and that route running ability, his ability to adjust to the football in the air. He can extend for that ball away from his frame. He's a guy to me that is a borderline first, second round pick, but a guy that I think is going to be playing in the NFL for a long time. Grant DuBose out of Charlotte. He's 6'3", 200 pounds, over 800 yards last season. Transferred from Miles College. He's working at Walmart before last season. This is a guy who can be pretty explosive. He can get deep and run those vertical routes. He'll beat corners off the line. I think people aren't expecting him to run as fast as he does there at 6'3". I think the speed is a little bit more of a build-up speed. than anything else. I think he does have some drops. Is that lack of concentration? Obviously, those are going to be question marks that teams are going to have. But I thought, Grant DeBose, there at the Senior Bowl didn't look too bad at all. 126 catches, over 1,600 yards, and 15 touchdowns there for Charlotte in his 2 years with the program, and a guy that I think could get himself drafted late. Zay Flowers, another guy that teams have as potentially their number one wideout. And when you think about Zay Flowers, look, 5'11", 177 pounds, you go to the route running ability. This is a guy who is so explosive in and out of his breaks. He's so difficult to cover because of that. You love that route running ability, but he's also explosive with his speed. I'm looking to see, that start-stop ability. I want to see what he's going to do in that 3-cone drill. I'm curious to see, with that route running ability, just how fluid he is and how explosive he is, and then just that straight line speed. I think Zay Flowers could solidify his status as a first-round receiver there at the Combine. This is a guy who also put on 13 pounds of muscle in advance of the Combine. This is a guy who definitely wants it, and it's definitely showing early on. Really curious to see what he can do out there on the field. Bryce Ford-Wheaton, 6'3", 224 pounds. He's a bigger, thicker receiver. I think his best game, honestly, was against Pittsburgh. And, just showing his adjustment to back shoulder throws, back shoulder fades, the excellent adjustment while extending for the football over his head. JT Daniels, that was a game where he just continued to put the ball on the money. A guy, he just continued to track the football well, the body control. His second touchdown, of the day, adjusted, control to pivot to the outside on a back shoulder throw into the end zone off of a fade, was able to haul the touchdown in before going out. But it was also his drop that led to a game-winning pick six by Pittsburgh corner MJ Devonshire. He basically sat down wide open, 13-yard gain, and the ball goes right through his hands. Devonshire drove on the football, able to pick that football, took off, and ultimately ends up scoring. That lack of concentration, I think, is really his biggest issue. So I'm really curious to see what Bryce Ford-Wheaton can do catching the football there at the Combine more than anything else. And look, he's one of the bigger receivers in terms of weight, so I'll be curious to see what that 40 time looks like as well. Just how quickly he can get down the field, and then also just how shifty is he going to be when he's carrying all that weight. He's a guy who could potentially even drop some weight coming into the Combine. Antoine Green, he was the running mate for Josh Downs, a guy that can get vertical, and elevate, get over DBs. Did have some untimely drops, so I'm curious to obviously see what those hands look like. Is he letting the ball get into his body, or is he really making sure that he's catching those with his hands away from the frame? And then how fast is he at 6'2" and 200 pounds? I think those are going to be questions that I'm going to be looking for there. With Jaden Hazelwood, this was a guy who transferred from Oklahoma to Arkansas, 6'3", 202, and really a redshirt junior, if you will, there for Arkansas. Really his best year as kind of one of the focal points in the receiving game. 59 receptions for 702 yards, 3 touchdowns. I would have loved to see him to come back to college for one more season. This is a guy that I think he's going to have a really explosive day there at the Combine to really get people to start turning their heads a little bit more. He could be a late round pick. I just think that there are a lot of receivers in here that he may get lost in the shuffle. Then you got Malik Heath out of Ole Miss, 6'3", 215 himself, 60 catches, 971 yards, and 5 scores, 16.2 yards per reception. He was a guy that jumped off the film late for me, and a guy that really started to come on and make plays there for Lane Kiffin and company, and a guy that I'm really excited to see. At 6'3", 215, what's that 40 time going to be? Is he a guy that can really sink those hips in and out of his breaks? But I thought he was a guy that, the concentration you saw was there. You saw the body control. tremendous hands, a guy that just always seemed to get open and was a reliable target there for Jackson Dart. Elijah Higgins out of Stanford, 6'3", 234, another guy who's built like a tight end. So, you wonder just, that vertical presence, that vertical speed, what are we going to see there? This is a guy that can be a physical blocker, also a guy that can get vertical at times. He did struggle in the All-Star games at times to really make a play. So I think Elijah Higgins has to have a big day there at the Combine. Xavier Hutchinson, 6'2", 208, out of Iowa State, number 2 in history behind Allen Lazard there. And look, for the Cyclones, this was a guy who was a Biletnikoff Award finalist. 107 receptions, over 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns, and he's another guy that I'm curious to see just how fast he's going to run. I think he plays a lot quicker and a lot faster than I think he may time. You see the 50-50 balls, he's absolutely able to attack those. Decent route runner, I think that's another thing that I see, but I just love his ability to pluck the football out of the air and then the physicality with which he runs after the catch. I think that's something that definitely stands out. I think he's a savvy route runner. I'm just curious to see what that 40 time is going to end up being when it's all said and done. Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee. Look, 6 foot, 185 pounds, and the junior, the Biletnikoff Award winner. When you think about Jalen Hyatt, obviously you think about the stats, right? I mean, 67 catches, over 1,200 yards, 1,267 to be exact, 18.9 yards per reception, and 15 touchdowns. When you talk about 15 touchdowns, obviously 5 of those were in one game, and that was against Alabama in the huge upset win over the Crimson Tide. 6 catches, 207 yards, and those 5 scores. That was, an average of 34.5 yards per catch, and a guy that, that's where he's kind of solidified his status as a guy that could be that Biletnikoff Award winner. It was really him and Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of doing battle throughout the season from that point forward. Jalen Hyatt, to me, reminds me a lot of Corey Coleman and Will Fuller, which is why I think he's going to end up seeing himself drafted in round number 1. I think a team's going to fall in love with his speed, that vertical ability, his ability to get down the field. We haven't seen enough, from a route tree from him. He didn't have to run a ton of routes there at Tennessee. Josh Heupel didn't have him run a lot of those. He was a guy that was just looking vertical and to get down the field in a hurry. So can he really sink those hips and drive in and out of his breaks? Can he set up defenders? Those are things that we didn't necessarily get to see. So I'm going to be looking at, obviously we know what the speed's going to be, but can he be a good route runner? And those are the things that I'm going to really be looking for at the Combine out of Jalen Hyatt. I'm going to be curious there. Andre Iosivas, they're out of Princeton. This is a guy who could run exceptionally well. A guy who's very explosive. That was something that I think was evident there at Princeton. The question mark is just going to be just how fast is he going to run? Is he going to be in the 4.3 range? A lot of people are expecting him to just absolutely turn heads. He's 6'2", 212 pounds. And look, he ran a 60-meter dash. Tremendous athlete. Could have potentially competed in track and field. Ultimately, you're talking about a 4.28 40 is kind of where they're expecting him to run, right around there. But really the translation there is the 2022 NCAA Indoor Championships. He ran a 60 meters in 6.71 seconds. So when you think about that, that could translate to a 4.28, which is just silly. This is a guy who I think could really put on a show, and he's really going to be a lot of fun to watch. But a guy that was a playmaker there for Princeton, and I think he's ultimately going to hear his name called on draft day. He'll be a day 3 pick, but look, one of the better FCS players in the entire draft, in my opinion. So after Andre, we get to Kearis Jackson out of Georgia. This is a guy who, I think there was a stacked group of receivers, and he never really got to showcase what he could do. I think Jackson the suddenness that you saw out of him, you saw on a lot of the kick returns, punt returns. That's really where he was able to showcase his skills. Really going to be curious to watch him as a receiver, because he didn't get to see a ton of balls going his way. So this will be a chance for him to get some of that exposure as a pass catcher. Raheem Jarrett, Maryland, 6 foot, 190 pounds. This is a guy who battled some injuries during his career. 5-star recruit, was the number 4 wide receiver coming out. Excellent hands. A guy who can be very sudden as a receiver, dynamic in space. I'm just curious to see just how fast he's going to run. He was the speed merchant to Dante Demas' size, really giving Talia Tagovailoa an exceptional target there on the outside. Michael Jefferson out of Louisiana is an interesting kid, 6'4", 205. I was kind of surprised that he came out, transferred from Alabama State. This is a guy who was able to get vertical down the field, and you see his ability to track the football over his shoulder. So obviously, you know that he's got the ability to not only track the football, but the body control and his ability to go up and attack the football in the air, which then takes us to Jure Jenkins. They're out of LSU. LSU had a lot of receivers there at the program, and Jure Jenkins, I'm waiting to really see him break out. There wasn't really a game where Jure Jenkins was able to separate himself. He's 6'4", 194 pounds. I'm really curious to see what that 40 time is going to be for such a tall receiver. But again, he was a guy that I didn't think separated a ton, so I'm really curious to see what we can see out of him there at the Combine. CJ Johnson, East Carolina, 6'2", 222 pounds, and a guy that plucks the ball out of the air in traffic and able to bounce it to the outside and take off down the field. He can be a weapon down the seam for sure, a guy that can get vertical. Was suspended in February but got reinstated, so obviously there's going to be some conversations that have to be made there. But I think CJ Johnson is one of those athletes. Again, he's 222 pounds. He's a thicker frame, so you're really curious to see what he can do. Especially as he's getting tested. Quentin Johnson, 6'4", 201, TCU. Is he this year's Drake London? That's really going to be the biggest question mark, I think, for me. Is coming into this final season for him, his numbers were actually better than Drake London's. Drake London, ultimately, I was a huge fan of his. He ended up being the number 1 receiver taken off the board. And this was a guy who was virtually uncoverable. And I basically said that if Quentin can have the type of season that Drake London had, he has all of the traits to be able to be that same type of a player. That said, look, 60 receptions, 1,069 yards, that's 17.8 yards per reception, 6 touchdowns. He averaged 19 yards per reception at 6'4" and 201 pounds. He's a guy that can absolutely get vertical. We know that. He's going to be a vertical threat. He's a guy that's going to be able to attack the football in the air. But can he be more than just a vertical threat? Can he sink his hips? Can he separate in and out of his breaks? Or is he just going to be a guy that's going to be just that vertical threat? That's going to be the major question mark there with Quentin Johnson. And, it's going to be interesting to see really what we're going to get out of him there at the Combine. How much are we going to really be seeing him in the drills? Hopefully we'll get to see Quentin Johnson put on a show for the entirety of the Combine. Charlie Jones out of Purdue. Look, 6', 188 pounds. This is a guy who transferred from Iowa, didn't get a ton of action, and then all of a sudden shows up at Purdue. Aiden O'Connell, was a childhood friend of his. They grew up playing football together, and you just saw the chemistry. And it's one of those things to where you'd love, like, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. You'd love to see these guys stick on the same roster together, because they made magic together. It was 6 foot, 188 pounds, 110 receptions, over 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns. I'm curious to see what that 40 time is going to be, because it didn't seem like anybody could really cover this guy. He was so quick coming off the line, excellent with his route running, and look, he got vertical against DJ Turner. Ball was thrown to the inside, adjust to the football, and able to make a 32-yard gain. he's in against Minnesota and was burning Terrell Smith. Against Syracuse, he's beating Garrett Williams. He's beating a lot of the top corners and just making these guys look silly. The route running ability, the speed, the separation with those breaks. He's a guy to me that I think is going to excel at the next level, and a guy that I think isn't getting enough credit. He'll probably end up being a third, fourth round pick, but I think he's an exceptional athlete. Malik Knowles, they're out of K-State, 6'3", 195 pounds. Curious to see the speed, because he's a bigger receiver, and you saw some dynamic speed at times, taking handoffs and being able to get down the field in a hurry. That's something that I'm going to be curious to see what Malik Knowles is able to bring to the table. 48 catches this past season, 725 yards, really his best season there, especially with Will Howard delivering the football. Then you get Matt Landers out of Arkansas, the transfer from Georgia. All-Star game standout early on in the All-Star game process. He's 6'5", 200 pounds, 47 catches there at Arkansas, 901 yards. That's 19.2 yards per reception and 8 touchdowns. Went to Toledo for a year there in 2021 and averaged 25.7 yards per reception on 20 receptions on the year. But he was definitely a vertical threat, a guy that could get down the field and contort his body and make these miraculous catches there in the air. Be curious to see what that 40 time is going to be for a guy at 6'5". Marvin Mims, 5'11", 177 pounds there for Oklahoma. Didn't have a huge route tree there at Oklahoma. Wasn't asked to do a whole lot. Jeff Levy's offense, he just had a very limited route tree. And ultimately, I'm looking to see what type of routes he can really run. Looking to see some of that ability to drop those hips and get in and out of breaks. Make sure that he's not just a vertical threat. But he's a guy, look, he was a tremendous athlete and a guy that was able to make plays for the Sooners. So he'll be an interesting watch for sure. Jonathan Mingo is another big physical receiver, 6'2", 222 pounds. This is a guy, he tracks the ball really well. He can beat guys off the line. Some of that suddenness coming off the line, beating guys to the inside on those slant routes. A guy that I think he'll be quicker than he is fast. That's one of the things that I saw out of Jonathan Mingo. Even though that size, I think we may see some build-up speed for him. I don't think the 40 time is going to be great, but definitely a physical dude. But you saw some lack of concentration at times. You saw inability to hold on to the football after taking a hit. So there are issues there. But I think he also attacks the football very well at times. It's just the consistency isn't always there. Missed half the year due to injury. So what type of player are we going to be seeing there at the combine? Puka Nacua out of BYU. Very fluid athlete. That's really what I expect to see. A guy that's just going to be fluid as a pass catcher. Transfer from Washington to BYU, and was it just. Didn't really see the field a ton for the Huskies. Played in just 6 games over those 2 seasons. Transfers to BYU for the final 2 years. And, 91 catches for over 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns during that time. Very smooth operator, smooth athlete. Catches the football really well. Only played in 9 games this past year. So medicals, you want to make sure that that's not going to be an issue at all for Puka Nacua. You transition from him to Joseph Ngata, 6'3", 220 pounds there for Clemson. And this is a guy who he's going to win the 50-50 balls. He's going to compete. You saw some of the back shoulder throws. Really dealt with some poor quarterback play there at Clemson. So, I think he's really in need of some momentum going his way. He came into that Clemson program and was a guy that everyone was expecting to be the next great receiver there, right? Had 17 catches for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns as a true freshman, and played in just 8 games there in 2021 after just 4 games in 2020. This past season, 41 catches, 528 yards, and 2 scores. Not much of a vertical threat, was a guy that was more of a possession receiver and a guy that could attack the football, especially on those 50-50 balls. So I think he needs to have a big combine to try to start separating himself a little bit. Trey Palmer out of Nebraska, this is going to be another guy that I expect to just blaze the combine. Exceptionally fast, 6 foot 180, transfer from LSU, over 1,000-yard receiver there for Nebraska, 9 touchdowns. Decided to enter the draft after his junior season. I think he's a guy who could ultimately compete his way into a day 2 selection when it's all said and done. A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest, 6'5", 206. This is a smooth operator. He's another vertical threat, a guy that is, I think we're going to see some speed out of him. My question is, I think it's really a lot of that build-up speed. It's not really sudden. So can he be a vertical threat? Absolutely. I think he's very smooth. He attacks the football with his hands, and he's able to adjust to the football. I think that's something that you absolutely see as well. But can he really sink his hips and drive out of his routes? That's going to be a big question mark for me. Want to continue to see that there at the combine. You saw that at times, but obviously when he's catching passes, you're going to see a tremendous catch radius. I think that's what's going to be a lot of fun. A.T. Perry is another guy that I think can end up being a 3rd-round pick. So I think that's going to be interesting for sure. Jaden Reed, look, you want to talk about a guy who put on a show at the Senior Bowl practices, a guy that just couldn't be covered. He's 6 foot, 190 pounds. They're coming out of Michigan State, and a guy that is very smooth as a route runner, can separate from guys. Shiftiness, lets the ball get into his body at times though as a pass catcher, so that is an issue. But look, the route running ability, he was making guys look silly at times, and was able to separate, run away from them. Didn't have quite the year that he had in 2021 where he went over 1,000 yards, but the athleticism was absolutely there, and I think this is the guy that's going to end up getting himself drafted probably the early part of day number 3. Rashee Rice, the 6'2", 203 receiver there for SMU. This is a guy, you wonder, where does he really fall? 112.9 receiving yards per game, a guy that, I believe that at one point was tops in the FBS. I don't know if it still was at the end of the season, but 96 catches, over 1,300 yards, and 10 touchdowns. This is a guy that is a playmaker. He's a guy that makes a ton of plays, and you see the speed. That's one of the things that I saw. Guys with angles, they struggled to maintain those angles, and just showcasing that speed, being able to take a short route and be able to turn it into a big gain. And so there are some people that are down on Rashee Rice, saying, he shouldn't be a top 5 receiver in this draft class. He's one of those guys that I think has a chip on his shoulder and has something to prove, to showcase and really show people why he should be considered as one of the top receivers in this draft class. Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati, I'm expecting him to have an explosive 40 time. This is the guy that 5'11", 171 pounds, not the biggest guy by any means, but 54 catches this past season, 899 yards, 9 touchdowns, a guy that can absolutely get down the field in a hurry, and a guy that I think could end up being a day 2 selection as well in this receiver class. Justin Shorter out of Florida. Now, Justin Shorter, interesting guy, has a big frame to him as well, 6'5", 228 pounds, transferred from Penn State to Florida, played in just 9 games this past season, but was a pretty consistent receiver in those 3 years with the Gators. 95 catches, just under 1,400 yards, 8 touchdowns. And really the question mark for me with him is at 6'5", is he going to be one of those receivers that is converted to tight end? He may be a priority free agent, maybe a guy that's going to sit on a practice squad for a little while. They bulk him up, and he could probably end up playing tight end. Just curious to see what that athletic profile is going to look like there at the combine. Jackson Smith and Jigba We know that he battled that hamstring injury for the majority of the 2022 season. 6 foot, 198 pounds. We also know what he did there against Utah in the Rose Bowl. This is a guy that just ended up making plays all over the football field, just tremendously explosive, and a guy that primarily worked out of the slot. So I think that's going to be a question mark, is can he do more than just work from the slot? But and really the biggest thing is what type of athlete are we going to be getting with Jaxon Smith-Njigba? Is he all the way back from that hamstring injury? Is that going to be a lingering injury that's going to continue to hamper him? But you look at it in the last 5 games of the season in 2021, 240 yards against Nebraska, 139 against Purdue, 105 against Michigan State, 127 against Michigan, and then the 15 catches for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Utes in the Rose Bowl. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, tremendous route runner, very explosive, and when I think of him, I keep thinking about Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, talking about JSN as the most explosive of the bunch. If he was healthy, it's easy for people to say, he probably wouldn't have been the #1 receiver in this draft class. To me, he should be. If I'm New England and I'm sitting there at number 14, this is the guy that I'm drafting. If I'm Houston sitting there at 12, you want another receiver, you're thinking about possibly trading Brandon Cooks, you want a receiver for Bryce Young, if he's going to end up being your guy, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, you could do worse than taking him right there at number 12. So he's a playmaker. He can come off the board that high. He could potentially come off the board there to the Chargers at 21. He's one of those guys that is somewhat polarizing, and I'm kind of surprised because I think it's mostly because we didn't see him there on the field in 2022. I still expect him to come off the board early, and if he is healthy, if that hamstring is right, I'm expecting a big combine performance out of him and kind of solidify his status as wide receiver 1 in this draft class. Cedric Tillman, 6'3", 215, battled injuries, and I think he struggled at times to separate. I don't think I saw the same explosiveness, so I'm really curious to see what we're going to see there. He didn't look to be 100% after coming back, so is he back? Is he healthy? And then, really, he was a lot of fun. Making plays after the catch. So physical, tough to bring down. A guy that can get vertical and catch passes over his shoulder with ease. His ability to adjust to the football. And when you think of the bigger receivers, there was a lot of hype around Cedric Tillman. And could he be the next Drake London because of that physicality and his ability to make plays down the football field? In 2021, 64 catches, 1,081 yards, 16.9 yards per reception, and 12 touchdowns. It was his injuries. He only played in 6 games that really helped Jalen Hyatt kind of take over that receiver position. I'm really curious to see what Cedric Tillman does. I think he needs to have a big combine, though, because I think that 40 time, I'm expecting it. After 2021, I think you're expecting, hey, this guy can get vertical in a hurry. 2022, we didn't see that. A lot of it was due to the injury, and so you want to see if he's able to get back to that form. Mitchell Tinsley, formerly of Western Kentucky, transferred to Penn State, 6'1", 205, was over 1,400 yards for the Hilltoppers in 2021, 14 touchdowns, 577 yards in Big Ten play with another 5 scores for the Nittany Lions. Tremendous athlete. He's a guy that I think is going to have to work hard to get himself drafted, but a guy that I think has a chance on the back end of day 3. Really curious to see what that 40 time is going to be. I thought he'd look good in the All-Star games, showing his ability to make plays and the adjustment to the football. He's one of those guys, though, that I think is a fringe draftable prospect at this point. Same goes really for Trey Tucker out of Cincinnati. I think this is a guy that can be a very explosive player there for Cincinnati. Look, he's only 5'9", 172 pounds, really going to be a guy working out of the slot. but he's known for his return ability, right? 2 kickoff returns for touchdown. In his career as a receiver, 111 receptions, just over 1,400 yards, and 8 touchdowns. So, there are other receivers that kind of outshined him, whether it was Alec Pierce to Tyler Scott. I think he's going to have to do a lot there at the Combine to ultimately turn heads and ultimately get himself drafted. Again, I think there's just other guys, other options that are out there. Parker Washington out of Penn State, 5'10", 215 pounds, really kind of an odd body type. He looks like a running back playing receiver. A guy who, to me, he excelled opposite, Jahan Dotson, right? And then when Jahan Dotson moved on to the NFL, you were expecting Parker Washington to kind of take over that role, and he just wasn't that guy. He's not that explosive playmaker that Dotson was. He just averaged 13.2 yards per reception in his career. And, he's one of those guys, it made you wonder if, that production and his ability to make plays was some of that tempered by the fact that Jahan Dotson was not there. Obviously, he had Mitchell Tinsley opposite him, but just a guy that left you wanting more. And I'm curious to see really what we're going to see out of him. Because, look, in 2021, 64 catches, 820 yards, 4 touchdowns. I know Penn State went to really running the football more than anything else. You had some really strong running backs there, obviously. Nick Singleton was a guy that was definitely carrying the load. And when Parker Washington was called upon, again, was left wanting more. So I'm curious to see what we get out of him. And he's one of those guys, it makes me wonder, Antonio Gibson was a receiver who ultimately, is a running back now. Could we potentially see something similar with Parker Washington? Ty Montgomery's another receiver who ultimately converted to running back. He just has that body type. I wonder if that's potentially on the table. Jalen Wayne, 6 foot 205, out of South Alabama. The name sounds familiar. Yes, he's the nephew of Reggie Wayne, a 6th-year senior. And this is a guy that, look, he can be explosive. I love the route running ability, his ability to high point the football. He tracks it well, locates the ball, high points it, and attacks the football in the air. And look, they're at South Alabama, the Jaguars, 6'2", 205. Just under 2,000 yards receiving in his career and 14 touchdowns, including 9 this past season. Really a guy that I think could find his way into the back end of the draft. I love the footwork that you see from him, some of that route running ability as well. So just really want to see that show up at the Combine. Dontavian Wicks out of the Virginia, 6'2", 208. This is a guy that I think could be an absolute playmaker at the next level. He's a lot of fun to watch for me. I'm just going to be curious again. Some of these explosive receivers, really want to see what they can do at the next level. Look, just played in 8 games in 2022, but previously 57 catches, 1,203 yards, 9 touchdowns, and that's 21.1 yards per reception. So a guy that can be an explosive downfield threat. Really want to see, is he healthy, and are we going to see that same explosiveness from him? And then finally, Michael Wilson, 6'2", 209, a big target, but a guy that really showcases ability to get open, to make plays, some suddenness to his game, some speed to his game in the All-Star games. And so, Stanford, obviously, quarterback play was up and down, with Tanner McKee, but I think both he and Elijah Higgins excelled, especially given where they were. So obviously you get to the Combine, you get to the All-Star games first and foremost. I thought Michael Wilson elevated his game much more than Elijah Higgins. So now really going to be curious to see what Michael Wilson can do as an encore performance there at the Combine. So we've done it. We've gone through the quarterbacks, we've gone through the receivers and the tight ends. Been able to take a look at every single one of those prospects and a little something hopefully that you can take away that you should be looking for at the Combine. Obviously, we'll be taking a look at the post combine results, who really helped themselves, who are the guys that still have their work cut out for themselves. We'll be doing that again once all 4 days of the combine are complete. So I think it's time to go ahead and put a wrap on the podcast. Make sure you tune in to the NFL Network. Watch the combine on Saturday, March 4th. And then I will make sure tomorrow that I am recording a podcast to discuss the running backs and the offensive linemen, because they will be taking the field on Sunday, March 5th. I can't wait to get through all 4 days of this combine. It's really a lot of fun to watch for me, because you really get to compare these athletes, side by side out on the field. You get to see these guys and really see how they work through the drills. You get to see how they are in some of these different settings. It's it is an awkward setting to say the least, but at the same time, you want to be able to compare these guys. This is really the only stage to where you can really look at all of these receiver prospects, or all of the quarterback prospects, or all of the tight ends, and be able to see them all run the same route, throw the same pass, run the same drills, and really be able to say, okay, look for the fluidity in the hips, or you look for the arm strength, you look for the ball placement, and you're really studying each of these quarterbacks, or each of these receivers, or each of these tight ends to really get a good feel for what they're doing well and who is doing it the best. And so obviously the game film is going to be number one, and you're hoping that what you see at the combine mirrors that. And I think it's just, I think we had a couple of really nice days there with the defensive line and linebackers, and then the DBs. So I think we're also going to see the same thing here with the offense really being